Good morning.
Good morning, Bob.
everybody. Oh, no, thank you. It's always good to have my wife around. When to open up, and she usually tells me when to shut up, you know. And we do have a couple of people, new people here. Richard and Linda. Okay. And hey, good morning. I'm gonna put these back here so you can take a sheet anytime. And if anybody comes in, if you wouldn't mind making sure they get one, I appreciate it. I'm Paul Day, and for everybody out there on the World Wide Web, it's October 20th, and we're here at Unity of Springfield in Springfield, Missouri. And today, this is part 2. We're going to be talking about Joseph Campbell. Actually, all of this that you're getting on paper comes from The Power of Myth that he wrote back. He didn't write it. It was an interview with Bill Moyer's PBS special, and it was turned into a book after that, I believe. I believe that was 85 and 86. And I believe Joseph Campbell died the next year after that interview. So let's go ahead and, well, first of all, let's just briefly center ourselves here. So let's go ahead and get comfortable. Have your feet planted on the ground if you choose. Close your eyes if you choose. And just be here. And feel your body present in the now. Feeling that energy that is all around. Coming from the ethers, coming from all that is. And filling your body and soul with just that ineffable rapture. Just feeling that energy flow down through your top of your head into your neck and shoulders, letting them relax. Letting all your facial muscles just go down through your arms and hands. Just feeling that river of love flowing through the torso, through the legs, and that energy flowing back into the earth, into that continual cycle. Continual cycle of energy being rebirthed in you. Thank you, God, for all that is, all that we are. And let us capture that, just a little speck of that love that you give us infinitesimally at every moment. With that I say amen. So, for those of you who have not read The Power of Myth, how many have read Joseph Campbell and Power of Myth? Most people? Okay, hi John. Good morning. So you're familiar with, the material pretty well. And for me, I've always said, if you want to learn something, teach it. And, I had The Power of Myth on my bookshelf for years, decades actually. And, I'd pick it up and read a little bit and go, oh, that's pretty cool, and then I'd put it back down because it just didn't resonate enough with me to read the whole thing. And I've watched, the PBS special with Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. In fact, I've seen him at least a couple times, and I've listened to the audio tape of it too before as I'm driving. So I was familiar with that, but I finally picked the book up. And there's something a little bit more to be said, when you're reading the word, and you can just, every sentence you can just kind of contemplate on it, and it just soaked in a little bit more. really appreciated the depth that Joseph Campbell had in his life, and how much integrity he carried around with him, and kind of went against the grain of the schools that he was in. I believe he taught at Harvard, if I'm not mistaken. But he was just he was a pioneer in the field of mythology, and so anyway, that's what captured me, and that's why I'm here talking about it today. So I'm talking about it because, I wanted to learn. So I looked up in the dictionary definition of myth, and it says a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. Okay, that's one definition. And I looked up another dictionary definition. A myth is a set of stories or beliefs about a particular person, institution, or situation, especially when exaggerated or fictitious. Morning, Jerry. There's a paper back there for you. So, can anybody else want to elaborate on what they kind of feel like is a good definition for themselves, or what's a good definition of myth to you that we accept in society? And thank you, John. And let's try and keep our comments succinct so we can get the material into. Go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly, I think for me, myth is mystical and brings people into the story.
Yeah.
Looking at their past, that gives that universal sense of connection.
Okay.
And I think that's what myth over time allows us to do.
Yeah, great. Myth evolves, doesn't it? I mean, it can start off as one thing and evolve. I put on, for myself, I put on here, myth can be somewhere between truth, a parable, a story that reflects what an author or culture is trying to historically or emotionally convey. It might have no truth, but exists to position knowledge, spiritual insight, or emotion. And, when we look at this, it's supposed to take us deeper inside, okay? That is the purpose.
I would say it's a good story that resonates with at least a portion of the population.
Yeah, good. Jesus said, those, who have eyes see, those who have ears hear. I believe, it's my own belief, that meant that sometimes we need to look at things in a different light than what is just right there, what is literal. Instead of reading things literally, maybe things were written to be at a deeper level. And I believe that's what Jesus was talking about with what some of the early history of Jewish writings.
Somebody said that religious language.
Oh, just a second. Can you talk in the microphone so we can get that on?
Oh, yeah. Someone said religious language is always a metaphor.
Good.
Because it's talking about things that are beyond.
And
it has to be metaphor.
Thank you for saying that, Richard. We're going to be talking about metaphor here too. So that's good. Anybody else? Brenda? Just a second.
It's I think a myth is a way of telling a story and explaining it to other people, and a lot of times it can be in written form or it can be taught in real life situations.
Right. I think, like everything else, before writing, we communicated through oral. We talked. And everything that, started off in the early writing started off as oral, communication, right? And so oral communication, of course, evolves. We know if we're telling a story to someone, they tell that story, they pass on that story, after, a few times or after a few hundred times, that story evolves, it changes, it becomes exaggerated possibly, it becomes the facts change, the whole picture changes to some degree. And I think that's what happens when they've taken some of the oral early history and turned it into a written language. So on number 15, I'm going to read 15, and could someone start off reading Joseph Campbell's statement, and we'll just kind of change, from one number to the next. We're not going to do all of these. We're going to kind of jump around a little bit. On number 15, Moyer says, I was about to say that we are creating new myths, but you say, no, every myth we tell today has some point of origin in our past experience.
The main motifs of the myths are the same, and they have always been the same. If you want to find your own mythology, the key is with what society do you associate? Every mythology has grown up in a certain society in a bounded field. Then they come into collision and relationship, and they amalgamate, and you get a more complex mythology. But today, there are no boundaries. The only mythology that is valid today is the mythology of the planet, and we don't have such mythology.
Go ahead and read that.
Most of the mess I know of is confined to a bounded community. In bounded communities, aggression is projected outward. For example, the 10 Commandments say, thou shalt not kill. Then the next chapter says, go into Canaan and kill everybody in it. That is a bound field. Participation and love pertain only to the end group, and the out group is totally other. This is the sense of the word Gentile. The person is not of the same order.
Okay, there's a lot there in those couple paragraphs, isn't there? And it really, the history of the Bible in early history is very interesting to me. And I love listening to scholars talk about some of the early history and some of the biblical writing, some of the Jewish history. And if you remember, the first Christians were not Gentiles, were they? They were all Jewish people. And so everything that was written for that Jewish population, that Jewish thought. And so Gentile, it evolved again. It evolved into being a, quote, Gentile religion.
Yeah, for me,
Keep it to your mouth.
is what Moyer was talking about is the key is with what society do you associate.
Yeah.
I think that is the key focal point.
Yeah.
And I think at the beginning, you have to know who you are first.
Yeah.
Before you can know who to associate with.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole essence of what the teachings, what Campbell was talking about, finding the bliss, finding out who you are, and then moving from that point.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole area, I think that's what Moyers was trying to get to. Well, I'm trying to get Campbell to expound on.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. Go ahead, Elby.
But Paul wrote to the Gentiles.
Paul, he did that. But Paul, remember, he wasn't teaching right away after Jesus died. I mean, the earliest people that they taught to were the Jewish people. Christianity, or those who followed Christ, were actually Jews to begin with.
But Paul was still pretty early.
About 50 years after.
Okay.
And you're right. It grew into, there were those who, of the disciples that carried on his work, there were those who preached to strictly Jews, and there were those who preached to those outside of the Jewish faith. Am I mistaken in that?
Well, I think the times, you have to look back at the times of when this was occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Over the last, you say from when Jesus lived for the next, and then moving everyone to that train of thought, moving Christianity as they knew it as to the masses, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is that transition and that transformation of the whole culture and society.
Yeah.
So what Paul did, I think later, was trying to get people to see what he meant, what was meant, and to move people in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever myths or what actually occurred were kind of a gray area, moving people into a train of thought that would become universal.
Thank you, Dan. Ellie.
So am I correct in your thinking that Paul's confrontation with Peter was 50 years after the crucifixion?
I don't know.
I just thought that, the confrontation between Peter and Paul was earlier than 50 years. So I'm just kind of
Jesus'
not sure there.
teaching when he was alive was strictly to a Jewish crowd.
The earliest writings that I understand is by Paul. But
They are.
we're still talking, even if they had that confrontation,
Mhm.
it was like still, the writings versus the actions don't portray exactly what was going on at that time, because all of the closest writing we have is that we understand today is Mark.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
there were earlier writings.
Yeah,
They
Mark
believed by Paul.
came after Paul.
Right. Well, but Paul, in terms of like their living, one thing is the writings, because a lot of the writings came way after the
Mhm.
people died, and
Yeah.
we don't know really who wrote them. They just were ascribed to
They were
a
missed.
certain apostle. But
Yeah.
but Paul there was a thriving Christian church that he was
Preaching to.
assaulting
Yeah.
before his conversion.
That's true.
So there was a Jewish Christian faith that was going on that he was being cruel to and actively before his conversion. So that had to precede his conversion.
Yeah. And we're not trying to get, I don't want to get too deeply into, history, Jewish history and everything, because we need to cover the material. But one thing it always struck me, in the Ten Commandments, it says, thou shalt not kill. And then right after it, God is saying to go and kill all the people in Canaan, It's just like, oh, this isn't computing in my head here. And it's like, and Joseph Campbell is saying, okay, well, those rules, those myths are about a bounded community. And so he's saying, don't kill anybody in your community, but outside, that's the enemy. And so those are the bad guys. We're still doing it today, aren't we?
Yeah.
It seems like so many parts of the world, it's an us versus them mentality. We're the good guys.
We
Hang on, Linda.
we had an opportunity to go to a Christianity and ecology conference one time with great environmentalists, some really great environmentalists. And there was a group that ended up being stewardship people, and then another group that ended up being deep ecologists, and they ended up almost not talking to each other. It is, even within our own community, we had those small divisions.
The divisions can be within a close group. And the thing is, there's as many thoughts as there are people. None of us are going to see everything the same, and we don't. We all have our own thoughts and opinions and beliefs, and sometimes we can carry those so strongly that we can get someone that believes 99.9% of what we believe, but you're concentrating on that little bit that we disagree about. When I went through seminary back in 2012 to an interfaith seminary in New York. And so we studied all the religions. And it's my belief that of all the religions, 95% we can agree on. It's the 5% that we fight over all the time. And we concentrate, and that you read about the papers and you hear about on the news. But most religions believe in the golden rule. They believe in love. They believe in connection. They believe in God. And yet we concentrate on that other stuff. So it's that division that somehow our egos want to just center on that. John?
You know, I was going to say, it's interesting how even today there are some people from all the religions who are very open to all the religions, are on interfaith councils and try to, work together and to, see how they're common, our common thing in positive spirituality and then there's the other group.
It's kind of a mainstream group. Here in Springfield, we have a great interfaith community where all the religions are involved in it. And many of the denominations of the Christian faith are involved in it. And we're involved with that group too. So, number 16, the voice of reason. Is that the philosophical way suggested by these mythological symbols? Someone want to read Campbell? Dan?
That's right. Here you have the important transition that took place about 500 BC. This is the date of the Buddha and Pythagoras and Confucius and Lao-Tzu. This is the awakening of man's reason. No longer is he informed and governed by the animal powers. He is guided by reason. And of course, what destroys reason is passion. The principal passion in politics is greed. That is what pulls you down.
Any thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and comment a little bit on that because I think this is what Campbell was saying is very correct.
Mm-hmm.
There was that age of enlightenment, for lack of a better way to call it, and moving from, you might even call it indigenous spirit that prior to this was kind of universal.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that almost in all indigenous populations where they have their own way of connecting the earth, the sky, all of that together.
Mm-hmm.
But at this particular time, whether it's Buddha or Confucius, Lao-Tzu, and I think it's a time of reckoning and also a time of reason and trying to reconcile the two.
Yeah, it's very interesting that Campbell, he kind of says talks about the different kind of myths, and he has that there's the nature religions. Indigenous people are generally connected to nature, and then we have those that are of the temple.
In China, prior to Confucius, when the shamanism was really the key thought, and you had all of these local ways that people saw of what we would call praying to that or universe, whatever. And a large part of what those who followed Confucius actually did is, in order to make Confucianism universal, was to go out and try to destroy that previous train of thought and try to get Confucianism to be the dominant power.
Yeah.
And then you had the Buddhism come in after that and kind of made the connection to the whole thing.
It's really interesting. It amazes me about 500 BC, all of these different brilliant minds came, Buddha, Confucius, and Lao Tzu, and Pythagoras, and it's like, how did that happen? What an incredible thing, that all came about at that. And they call it, he calls it the age of reason, man's reason.
There's some people that thinks that, not New Thought people, but other religious people thinks that life on earth began when Adam and Eve was in the Bible, and they don't think that life was around before Adam and Eve. so it's hard to tell these kind of stories to them kind of people.
It is. It's very hard. You know, and you can either read the Bible literally, or you can see that the Bible was written mythologically. And sometimes there are little bits of both. Go ahead.
I was really struck by the sentence, and of course, what destroys reason is passion.
Yeah.
Because I would say, okay, well, and of course, what destroys passion is reason. I mean, and
Yeah.
and it's there's this balance, you know, because you know, without being excited about, and of course, Agesters would say, you know, that your emotions are your guidance system.
Yeah. And I look, you know, when I read that, I went, oh, wait, just a minute, I like passion. You know, but this is kind of passion in a negative sense, you know.
And it's almost like, is science real?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people who think of science as not being really relevant.
Yeah.
And is that, whether it's thinking about global warming or a myriad of other things, is like seeing beyond what they should see as science is fact.
Yeah.
And thinking, well, that really doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
And that's how we get, that's what I have problems.
I don't know when it happened, but all of a sudden science became a bad name. You know, and it's like my whole life, science has been something that, you know, has been there to further truth and to find, not to say that we've found that ultimate truth, but we're looking for that ultimate truth. And all of a sudden, bam, all these conspiratorial theories come up, and you know, and science all of a sudden is just a bad name, and it just blows my mind.
It all basically started in 1947 for the UFO incident in Boston. There's a book called Unacknowledged that will, So what happens is the lie becomes the truth. And so this is what we live in right now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
And not to get too deep into that.
Okay.
But I also think that the oligarchies of, you know, pharmaceutical industry, military industrial complex, and that have, you know, really spent a lot of money on science, and that's been the driver of some of scientific exploration. And I think that has got people.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, and the thing is, you know, some of those things that we, you know, you're talking about a certain subject there, Jerry, which I'm very familiar with, but some of the things that have been, quote, hidden have come about to be found out that they are true, you know. And so, you know, and that makes people question. And of course, I think most scientists are legitimately there for ultimate truth, you know. But there is some agendas of some people, you know, to. You know.
I think the key thing there is that word greed.
The word what?
Greed.
Yeah, greed. It is. Yeah.
Because it's all agenda.
Yeah.
And it's all for my profit.
Right.
You know, by everybody.
Yeah.
And so that place, when you have passion without greed, it's a beneficial thing.
It can be, definitely. I think we do have to move on, so there's no last time.
I think following up on that idea of lack of limitation and there's not enough for everybody. You know, I have to get mine.
Yeah.
And if I get everything I think I need or want, that doesn't mean enough for you to have the same.
Yeah.
And I think that idea of passion that people have for always getting more for themselves instead of being more universal is part of the problem.
Thanks. We're going to move on. I'm going to jump some, but we're going to go to number 22. So if you want to find 22 on your page here, and I'm doing this just simply because of time. We don't have time to cover all. This is all taken from chapter 2 in the Power of Myth, by the way. And I think the name of that chapter is Going Within. Okay. Number 22, Campbell says, we want to think about God. God is a thought. God is a name. God is an idea. But its reference is to something that transcends all thinking. The ultimate mystery of being is beyond all categories of thought. As Kant said, the thing in itself is no thing. It transcends thingness. It goes past anything that could be thought. The best things can't be told because they transcend thought. Wow, I mean, that gets way out there, doesn't it?
Ineffable.
Ineffable. And I tell you what, when I mean, I had heard the word ineffable. I didn't even quite know what it meant many years ago. And then when I really discovered what it meant, it was like, whoa, I love that word now. It means you can't explain it in words, basically.
Well, I know when I gave a program here a few years ago on the mind of Kant, and the whole idea of thinking of the times when he was really in Germany, and how the church was so divided basically within the monasteries and universities at the time, and the idea of thought beyond what they knew was really a challenge for them because they didn't know beyond what they previously knew.
Right.
And I think Kant kind of blew that away, because he made people then see that there's something more out there that you're not aware of or don't want to be aware of, that you need to pay more attention to.
Yeah. But, when we talk about God, if we're talking about mainstream Christianity, I mean, you've always heard the description, it's the old man in the sky, right? and of course, this is obviously a myth, because there is no old man in the sky out there, right? I mean, science has shown that space is out there. There's nowhere that is, So, and at the same time, I try and think, how can this be useful? Having that myth of the old man in the sky, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Go ahead, Ellen.
Well, I think part of that comes from, we say it came out of the blue. Okay. And so we associate blue with the sky. Also the water, because memory, but an old man is considered something of wisdom.
Good.
We go to old men to seek wisdom.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a attempt to personify a concept. And I think people, began to think that it was literal because they didn't understand it.
Good.
You can't understand infinity with the finite mind.
You're right.
You can experience infinity with the finite mind, but you can't explain it, and you can't describe it.
Taoism.
Yeah.
And so I think that old man concept came from going to the old man for advice. And so since the old man can't give it to you, you get it from the sky. It drops out of your consciousness.
Yeah.
I think this
And it's a great explanation.
It really is. And what Joseph does in The Power of Myth is to take that idea of the sky and define it some way. Putting things in definable terms that people can associate within their own limited knowledge of who they are and what they know. And I think that's that whole idea of God being some, being out here, because they needed something to latch onto.
Right.
And even today, I think
I think that's what it is too. People need something to latch onto, and I think that's the power of that myth. When early on our lives, we've always kind of had that mythology of, well, there's an angel sitting on my right shoulder telling me what to do, and there's the devil sitting on my left shoulder, right? I mean, we've all heard that, haven't we? I mean, I sure did, when I was growing up. And I kind of, it kind of made my brain go there. It's like, oh, I should, and then the devil's telling me, oh, you can go ahead and do that, and, but it is, and of course, you can either look at that as, I guess you could look at that as being literal. Maybe there is an angel sitting on my right, but it's a mythology, and it creates something in our consciousness that gives us more discernment over, how should I think, how should I behave, how should I act, Anyway, go ahead. One quickly, LB, and we got to move on.
Which is kind of which dog are you feeding?
Yeah, exactly.
The Indian proverb. You feed the one that you want to grow, and that's the one that you will become.
Yeah. Let's go to 24. And again, take your time later to take these sheets home if you want to read it. They're pretty interesting, questions and answers. 24, Moyers. When I read these myths, I am simply in awe of the mystery of it all. We can presume, but we cannot penetrate. Who wants to read Campbell? LB.
That is the point. The person who thinks he has found the ultimate truth is wrong. There is an often quoted verse in Sanskrit, which appears in the Chinese Tao Te Ching as well. He who thinks he knows doesn't know. He who knows that he doesn't know knows. For in this context, to know is not to know, and not to know is to know.
How many of you have had teenage kids before? How many of them know?
That you don't know.
But I tell you what, they are so certain that they know it all. And it seems like we all go through that. I think I was probably the same way when I was a teenager, going on 18 or 19, 18, 19 even. And, I don't know what age it is that you all of a sudden start knowing and thinking and believing that, gee, I don't know it all. But it is so true. And we do have people that carry that on through their lives, so where they think they do actually know it all. And, and if we can open up to the possibility that maybe we don't, maybe we have more to learn, even though we're set in our ways and everything. And yeah, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, then it follows up. Moyer asks them, are some myths more or less true than the others? And he says, they are true in some senses. Every mythology has to do with the wisdom of life as related to a specific culture at a specific time. It integrates the individual into the society and the society into that field of nature.
Thank you, John.
I just thought that was.
It is, yeah. Dan.
Well, thousands of years ago, the earliest, it was the shaman who was the ultimate storyteller.
Yeah.
And the connection to the universe that people had was through the shaman.
Yeah.
It was that spiritual being that sat amongst them that was able to give them some direction.
Yeah.
As to how they would live. So this whole idea, what was myth and what was real, it was the storyteller's ability to be able to show how they were connected, how each individual was connected to that universal thought.
Yeah.
And myth helped him or her to tell the story.
Yeah.
And it's never changed.
Yeah. I love my, when I was married to my previous wife, she taught down on the Navajo reservation in New Mexico and Arizona. And so I would go down there to see her during that time, and learned a lot about indigenous thinking in indigenous ways. And it's so interesting to hear about the mythologies of how they explain creation came into being, and of course, the Navajo call themselves Dine, D-I-N-E, but it's Dine is the way you pronounce it, which means the chosen. And if you look at so many of the native cultures, they consider themselves to be the chosen. But they all have these really incredible stories of how they came to be, their creation stories. They're all myth, and in some ways they kind of believe it. In some ways I wonder, do they really believe, some of those stories?
I think a great example of that was the Sioux Black Elk, who we spoke of a couple of years ago here, and Black Elk was in a long line of what would be shaman, or his family had been, you might say, minister for generations, and he was able to foresee the future of the Sioux population. He foresaw the little bighorn. But it was that idea of connecting to myth. But the biggest thing I think with the Navajo, and as an example of the Sioux, was that connection to nature. Nature was what brought them into the ability to see themselves as a part of an overall scheme of things. It's like the Chinese being considered themselves one of 10,000 things. Man was just one of the universal aspect of everything that's here.
Number 25. Moyers. What would a member of a hunting tribe on the North American plains think? This is right to your comment. Gazing up on Michelangelo's creation. Anybody want to read Campbell? Volunteers. Thank you, John.
That certainly is not the God of the other traditions. In other mythologies, one puts oneself in accord with the world with a mixture of good and evil. But in the religious system of the Near East, you identify with the good and fight against the evil. The biblical traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all speak with derogation of the so-called nature religions.
Okay. Any comments on that?
Yeah,
that's kind of interesting because
that whole dichotomy of East versus West. Even going back to the Western thought following Plato and Aristotle, and what follows forward from that point, the separation, how man was separated from nature as another entity, which was totally the opposite of what you saw in the Near East and India and China and elsewhere. It was a part of nature. There was no separation. And we are not here to destroy nature to our benefit. We are to make nature a part of who we are.
I think it's kind of interesting because I feel like in some respects we're coming full circle, and that with many indigenous religions, they're now becoming more, we're looking at them a little bit more. And we're looking at, because they were nature religions, and now we're honoring that, I think, to some degree. So, and I think something like climate change is demanding it. We're seeing that something's going on here, folks. And, I think there are many of us that are questioning how far from nature can we go before it's really going to be hurting us. Linda.
It's an interesting thing when they look at cave art. They say they realize that at that point that they could be part of the food chain. And that made a big difference in their consciousness.
Very good. Yeah, thanks, Linda. Is that it? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to 26. And this is, what is a metaphor? And Richard, you were talking about that. Campbell says, oh, you can't read. Oh, that's fine. Okay, Linda, thank you.
A metaphor is an image that suggests something else. For instance, if I say to a person, "You are a nut," I'm not suggesting that I think the person is literally a nut. Nut is a metaphor. For example, Jesus ascended to the heavens. The denotation would seem to be that someone ascended to the sky. That is literally what is being said. But if that were really the meaning of the message, then we would have to throw it away because there would have no such place for Jesus literally to go. We know that Jesus could not have ascended to heaven because there is no physical heaven anywhere in the universe. Even ascending at the speed of light, Jesus would still be in the galaxy. Astronomy and physics have simply eliminated that as a literal possible physical possibility. But if you read God ascended to heaven in terms of a metaphoric connotation, you see that he has gone inward, not into outer space, but into inner space, to the place from which all beings come, into the consciousness as the source of all things, the kingdom of heaven within.
Okay, thank you so much, Campbell.
I didn't know you might age
I mean, and that's just it, and we were talking about this a little bit before. And I think that's the difference of what we kind of teach in New Thought, which is that we go inward, okay? And there's something beyond the physical that we're talking about here. And it's not Jesus ascended to heaven, meaning Jesus taken off like a rocket into outer space, I think that's mythology, That's my,
And even the inward is metaphor
yeah,
because
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
The next thing is Moyer 27.
Okay, yeah. In fact, LB, why don't you go ahead and read that, LB, on 27.
So the story of Jesus ascending to heaven is a message in a bottle from a shore someone has visited before.
Campbell says.
That's right. Jesus did. Now, according to the normal way of thinking about the Christian religion, we cannot identify with Jesus. We have no intimate Jesus. To say, "I and the Father are one," as Jesus said, is blasphemy for us. However, in the Thomas Gospel that was dug up in Egypt some 40 years ago, Jesus says, "Who drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I shall be he." Now, that is exactly Buddhism. We are all manifestations of Buddha consciousness or Christ consciousness, only we don't know it. The word Buddha means the one who woke up, and we are all to do that. To wake up to the Christ or Buddha consciousness within us is blasphemy in the normal way of Christian thinking, but is the very essence of Christian Gnosticism and of the Thomas Gospel.
Comments?
There's a lot there.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot there, and I think it's the idea of my way or the highway.
Yeah.
I think that's what really got everyone in trouble from the very beginning. And the Western thought, I almost think it was the Romans' fault. Because when they saw themselves as all powerful and had this large domain around the Mediterranean and one thing or another, and had all these people under control, they had the power. And when the Christianity, the whole thing came about in Judea, and that thing is that they needed control. They needed a way to control people. And they just decided to mirror, in my own view, what the Romans were doing.
Yeah.
And that's what they've been doing now for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
The same idea.
It's interesting. We were talking about the passion of greed is not the passion of control. Almost is just as powerful and maybe even more powerful than greed in our world,
It's like, why do I have to believe what you believe?
Yeah.
the coexistence of spiritual ideas and bureaucracy. There's a tension because of bureaucracy, regardless of its purpose, whether it's political, religious, or educational, or healthcare or whatever is to promulgate itself. That's its first
That's true.
purpose
That's
and
true.
goal. And so any of the ideas that go with it, but again, whether it's education, spiritual, healthcare, whatever, are going to be secondary to maintaining the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Control.
Yeah.
That's a part of the,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people's ideas about how to keep a bureaucracy going is maintaining.
John, you want to read 28?
Who has the ears to hear, let him hear. Campbell, there has to be a training to help you open your ears so that you can begin to hear metaphorically instead of concretely. Freud and Jung both felt that the myth is grounded in the unconscious.
Okay. And this has been my interest for so long. And Campbell, if you look at, I've been reading John Shelby Spong, if people familiar with him. And, he talks about this a lot. He talks about how was the Bible meant to be interpreted. And he talks about how it was not meant to be interpreted literally. It was meant to be interpreted mythologically, metaphorically, allegorically. It was supposed to take us deeper, not to be taken literally. Not all of it anyway. Some of it, yes.
But what is being said here by Campbell is that the idea of the myth is grounded in the unconscious.
Yeah.
Where are we doing what we're doing from?
Yeah.
What is that spark that resides within us to move in a particular direction and who to follow?
Yeah.
And who are we to follow whatever that may be?
Yeah.
And I think the whole key to what Moyers, I think, is trying to get to try to expound, or Campbell to expound on, is the idea of the myth is grounded into our unconscious that is eternal.
Yeah.
Where does that eternal connection that we each have? And I think that's what Campbell tried to explain, and he did so well.
Yeah. Thank you.
But it's also,
Go ahead, Richard.
I think the unconscious, again, always.
Don't hold it to your mouth.
The unconscious is nature in
Yeah.
us. It's how nature expresses itself
Okay.
in us. We're not separate from nature.
Yeah.
And the unconscious is the way to get into that source.
Thank you,
I
Richard.
think that's another way to look at it.
Thank you.
Nature would teach us.
Let's go on to 29. What about this idea of good and evil in mythology, of life as a conflict between the forces of darkness and the forces of light? Campbell. Got a volunteer?
Campbell. That is the Zoroastrian idea, which has come over into Judaism and Christianity. In other traditions, good and evil are relative to the position in which you are standing. What is good for one is evil for the other, and you play your part, not withdrawing from the world when you realize how horrible it is, but seeing that this horror is simply the foreground of a wonder, a mystery. All life is sorrowful, is the first Buddhist saying, and so it is. It wouldn't be life if there were no temporarity involved, which is sorrow, loss, loss, loss. You've got to say yes to life and see it as magnificent this way, for this is surely the way God intended it.
And it's, that's one thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately. In the last 9 years, I've written them all down. We've lost 31 people in our church, just from death. And some are younger, some are older, but, and it just, I think about it, it's like, wow, and that loss, it gets to me, whether I want it to or not, it's there in depth. And and yet at the same time, it's like life was meant to be lived in the present, and we move on. We have to move on, But, and we have people in our church now who have lost a loved one, maybe a spouse, and it just soaks into the depth of your being. How painful that is, or can be painful, and yet at the same time, as Joseph Campbell is saying, that temporality, we have to say yes to life, and we have to keep moving on. So,
I was going to say, no love, no loss, no loss, no love.
yeah.
One thing that's connecting to that, Paul, is also what he ultimately gets to is following your bliss.
Yeah.
Is the ultimate key to longevity.
Yeah.
And what the next step may be.
Yeah.
Well, we may not know what that next step is,
Yeah.
but just simply following our bliss will help us to take us there. And that, I think that is the overall theme of what Campbell was teaching.
It was. I agree. I just wanted to point out one thing in here, Zoroastrian idea. And this is something that I had picked up a few years ago regarding the idea of hell and Hades, and that idea didn't even come to the Jewish tribe until after they were kicked out of Israel and had gone to Babylonia, and then that was where they picked up this Zoroastrian idea of the concept of hell. And so it's not even an original Jewish idea. Yeah. And just as a thought, in unity, we do not believe in hell. So go ahead, Elby.
Okay, so I have been listening to Abraham Hicks for almost as long as I've been at Unity.
Mm-hmm.
And they have such a different take on death.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jerry is like all the time coming through Esther, and she knows when it's Jerry giving her information. And I have such a good relationship with Beverly. She's always hanging out with me. I felt really almost no grief when my sister passed. And once in a while, something triggers. It says, oh, I wish I could tell her that. But then it's like, oh, I can. And so I don't, it's so different. And I think John Amphonson's funeral was such an incredible demonstration of that. And yes, I know that Amy misses his physical presence, but he was so present, even to the fact that the books that weren't here got here in the middle of the funeral. It was such an amazing demonstration of the fact that there's a veil, but we've pierced the veil.
Yeah.
And we don't have to have that. We don't have to go through that because they're still right here.
Yeah.
And sometimes my perspective has so altered and so changed in embracing that concept that it's amazing. It's peaceful.
One last comment, and then we have to stop because I'm out of time.
just following up on that, I think that's what quantum physics teaches us in the idea of a continuum. That the spirit continues, and I think more people have a sense of that continuation, the easier death, the thoughts of death become. And also when you think back of what Chungza taught, particularly in not fearing death, and how a lot of what Chungza taught later became Zen Buddhism, and that whole connection of how that all worked. But I love your comment because I think it was really simple core, getting back to what Joseph Campbell was trying to teach and tell of his own story, was that we all live in this continual growth of spirit, and I think that was essential.
Thanks,
get the
John.
announcement?
Yeah, I've got the announcements right here. Thanks, John. You want to read them, John? Go for it. Hey, before you do, it's been a great class. I love the discussion. Thank you very much. I probably will do one more class in December on Joseph Campbell and just trying to tie up some of the stuff. It's hard to get a whole lot of information. Here, I printed all this off and I'm thinking, can I really get all this in here? It's like, oh, we covered maybe a third of what you have here written down. So take it home, read it if you want to. Pick up the book again. It just makes great discussion. The Power of Myth.
Yeah, it's very, thanks for sharing this with us,
Thanks.
Paul, because it's great discussion material. It really makes you start wheels going in your head and stuff. So it's pretty cool. Meditation is tonight at 6 p.m. and is open to everyone. The mat makers are meeting every Thursday at 10 a.m. The group weaves sleeping mats out of the plastic bags which are donated to folks who are unsheltered. The mats provide a waterproof barrier between them and the ground when they sleep, and their goal is to make 100 mats in 100 days, and they would love your help. Next Sunday, the 9:15 New Thought World Religion Adult Education class, Greg Lee will present the new dream based on the 4 agreements. On Tuesday, October 29th, from 6 to 8 p.m. at the O'Reilly Center for Hope Community Partnership of the Ozarks is having a crisis cold weather shelter volunteer training. This is for all new and returning volunteers. Some of the topics covered will be de-escalation, harm reduction, and using Narcan. They are providing food, and you can sign up in the foyer or scan the QR code and to sign up online. Our next Friendship Sunday potluck is November 3rd. Everyone is invited to bring a dish and stay after service for food and fellowship. Please sign up in the foyer with what you plan to bring. Deidre D'Amico will be facilitating a 3-part class on Understand your rising sun and moon signs. Participants will learn the meaning, significance, and importance of these signs. Classes will be November 3rd, 10th, and the 17th from 1:30 to 2:30. You can sign up in the foyer. Simone's got it's a time for the fall fundraiser, and Simone Cook is planning a Falling for Unity dinner on November 9th. There will be a live music, a bonfire, silent auction, food, and drinks. Tickets are $20, and this includes dinner and 2 drinks. She's asking for donations for auction items and desserts. She will also need volunteers to help set up and tear down. You can sign up in the foyer. It takes many volunteers to run our crisis cold weather shelter. The biggest need is for overnight volunteers. Last year, we started paying each volunteer $50 per night. We plan to do that again this year. If you'd like to help, you can sign up online by scanning the QR code in the foyer. It will take you to a volunteer page where you can select the volunteer position you would like to do and then select the day you're signing up for. If you want to see what shifts are open, the schedule is posted in the foyer. If you see any openings you can fill, please see Lisa or Lacey, and they will be in the fellowship hall right after the service today to answer questions and show you how to sign up. And we are at the beginning of the 7th week of our 8 items in 8 weeks shelter donation drive. We've selected 8 items. The item for today was toilet